ever leave this world alive, I'll come back down and sit beside your feet tonight. Wherever I am, you'll always be more than just a memory. Well, if I ever leave this world alive.
Going to be looking at some different grading schemes and how professors use them and why this kind of matters. So what we have here is we have our good old-fashioned Excel spreadsheet opened up, ready to go. And we're going to be looking at 3 common grading schemes, all of which you're probably going to see at some point in time in your academic career. The first one we're going to look at is a straight average. This is arguably the easiest one to compute. The second one will be a point system. Many colleges and universities are going to point systems to keep things quote-unquote easy, but again, there are pros and cons to any of these. And the last one is weights, which is by far the most complicated. And if you don't know what you're doing with weights, you're not going to come up to the same number that the professor is. And you'll see why we use this, and again, what are the pros and what are the cons. So let's take a look right at our example. The numbers are going to be the same no matter which one of these grading schemes that we use. So the numbers are going to be fixed. And in this class, which is not a class of any students that I have ever taught, we have 5 tests, 3 discussions, 3 quizzes, project, 2 papers, a midterm, and a final exam. And as we can see, the final didn't go so well. Got a 65 on that. Well, what happens if we decide we are going to jump over here and student actually got an 85? Well, you can see that that didn't really do too good. You went up by a point, whoop-de-diddly-do. So what happens if you get zeros on all your discussions? Oh boy, that hurt. So what are the pros? The pros are super easy. You just add everything up and you find an average. What's the disadvantage to this? Well, a discussion that may take you 8 minutes can arguably sink your grade completely if you forget about it and the professor won't let you make it up because it's worth the same exact amount as a final or a midterm. So the pros to this is that it's super easy to compute. The cons are this is no real way to run a class when you do have a variety of different assignments and you need to differentiate the importance of those in some way, shape, or form. This now leads us to a point system. So here we have a point system and same numbers, right? But now we have designated point values for all of our items. So we still have the percents. We still have the same overall score that you received on those items. And now you can see that based on an 84% on a final exam, we're at an 83.4. Well, if we went to an 84 over here, you can see we're still solid at an 85. So we have a slight point discrepancy, but nothing too drastic. So why is this difficult or better or whatever? Well, the first thing is generally you're not going to see a percentage when it comes to something like this. You're going to see a straight points value. Okay, so what you're going to see there is the 42.5. And a 42.5 out of 50 is one thing, and a 42.5 out of 100 is something else. Now, it's still easy to compute. If you add everything up, you're going to get 839 points, which equals an 83.9% in the class. Well, what are some good things about this? Well, if we, once again, have a little bit of an issue with our final exam, well, now we're down to a 798, which would be a 79.8. So we start to see that there are big point values that matter and smaller point values matter as well. So if you were to absolutely just sink all the discussions, Well, you're at a 69 or 76.9. You're probably still passing most general education classes. You saw when we did that on the average, that got you wrecked. So a lot of schools have gone to this. They like the 1,000 point value. So what's the problem here? Well, you have to come up with point values that are representative for the work that you're doing. So for instance, paper number 1, paper number 2. Okay, paper number 1 and paper number 2. Let's go ahead and fix that typo right now. You have a 10-page paper twice in this semester. It's only worth 75 points. It's slightly more important than an exam for all that extra work. Doesn't seem really quite fair, right? But since schools may limit the amount of points to keep it simple, we can't really just add to it and turn this into a 1,200 point spread or a 1,500 point spread, because now we're right back to some confusion. What are these totals worth? How much are there in the whole class? And again, it's not as easy as the average. It's still easy to compute, but when you start getting into all these different point scores, it gets a little messy to see how things all fit into the larger picture. The last one here is weights. Well, you can see that there is a whole lot going on here, and that's because the weights give you a total picture immediately of what is important in your class and what is not as important in your class. So if we look, we see that tests are worth roughly 20%. Discussions are 10%, quizzes are 10%, your project is 25%, papers are 10%, midterm is 15%, and the final is 10%. So what are some things that we can figure out based on what we're seeing? Well, the first thing is your final is not as important as a project. Right? Your final is not as important as a project. Your project is 25% of your total grade. Your final is not. So notice that our sums equal 100. Now you do have to figure out some math here to see what's going on in the background. But from a professor point of view, to see the large picture, for a student perspective to see what's the big picture, you know that your final, your papers, your quizzes, your discussions are these smaller point value items in the grand scheme of things. And if there's less of them, they matter more, of course. But they're not as important as doing well on your tests, nailing that project, and having a good midterm for whatever reasons. So first thing I have to do in a weight situation is I have to have the categories set up. So where many of you go wrong is you just add all the points together, or you just add all the stuff up and then make an average. And you can't do that with a weight. That's only a part of the equation. So for each one of these sections, the tests, the discussion, the quizzes, etc., you must average what it is and everything in that section. So we can see that we have an average in our test of 77%. And what we do is we multiply the average of that area against what the weight is, which gives us 15% total. Well, we know out of the 20 possible percent, or the 20 points that we could get from tests, we have 15 of those points. And that's all we're going to get. Now, we then do this for everything else. We see that we have a 93% average for discussions, and out of the total of 10 points, we have what would be 9.3%. And this continues on and on and on and on. And notice how even though we have an 86% in our quizzes, it's still only worth the same as the 3 discussions. So they're equal value. Using the same numbers with weights, we see that you would have a class grade of 86% in this class for doing the same exact work because the weights are different. So watch what happens. Watch what happens if we just go in here to, let's say, quiz number 2, and we give you a 50. Doesn't really hurt. Doesn't really hurt. Well, what if you zero out all the quizzes, don't do any of the quizzes? Now you're down to a 78. Again, doesn't really hurt. But what happens if I get a really bad project? Whoops. What happens if I get a really bad project? That's because this is typed in. So if I do a 56 here, I have to do a 56 there. You can see that hurt a lot. That hurt a whole heck of a lot because of the fact that is a big point item. So now what would happen if I start making things more or less important? Well, now we can see that these numbers start having different effects. Now, the goal of this is to show you that when you are dealing with a weighted score, make sure you've looked at your core syllabus, make sure you see what the weights are, and then you can create a fairly easy spreadsheet if your professor does not provide one using Excel or any free spreadsheet tool. You can do this on your phone, you can do it whatever. So how would you do it? The first thing you have to have is each one of your categories set up, whatever they might be. And typically this is limited to not more than 5 or 6 different areas, and it's delineated somewhere on your syllabus. You then have to have an area where you can put in those scores, whatever it is you're getting for those items. You then have to average them and multiply them against whatever the weight is going to be. And then that will give you, ultimately, the total number that you're going to receive from that area. You can create little checks for yourself, such as this here, which just says, hey, all my weights add up. Generally speaking, learning management systems like Canvas and Blackboard and Brightspace and Moodle will tell an instructor, hey, your stuff doesn't equal 100%, fix it. Might not always do that in the case of Blackboard when you're importing classes and something goes, runs amok, but Canvas has a little bit better thing going on where if it doesn't equal, it's going to tell you and it's going to verify that you want to save that. The reason why weights are favored by some professors like myself, again, is simply because I can look at this and I can see what matters and what doesn't. And based on what I'm trying to achieve in my class, if my class is about a culmination project, such as a capstone, then yes, I immediately know that I have the right amount here. Now, could I do the same exact thing in points? Yes, I could. I could do the same exact thing in points by making the project 250 points or whatever and base it off of 1,000. But again, when we start playing with these different point values, because is this, as much work as a paper, so why is the paper less than if, it is a considerable amount of work? Well, this is why I prefer using weights, so I can see what it is that I'm assigning to students. And if the institution comes to me and says, hey, we got to make sure that people can pass exams, then I need to make sure that things like tests and quizzes, midterms, and finals are the bulk of my grade. And if you look at what we have here, the bulk of the grade, if I was to add all these up, tests, quizzes, midterm, and final, 20, 30, 45, nearly the entire class is graded on timed assessments, which are the things you want to focus on without forgetting that, hey, a lot of this other stuff is going to hurt if I don't do well either. But you can see that if I was to blow a single test at 20%, it might be comparable to me missing all 3 of the quizzes. So if I have a choice and time is of the essence between choosing between a test that's worth roughly 4 points off my total grade and a quiz that is worth 3, I'm probably going to choose the test. if I have to make that decision. And it is better for me to work on my project than it is for me to worry about a discussion board, because I have to get a good grade in that project. So I hope you folks found this of value. I hope this demystifies some of the things that you will see as you are going through your college classes. And as always, feel free to add a comment below and make suggestions for anything else you'd like to see on the channel. This is Professor Finn signing off, and I'll see you next video.